The other one, I guess, is diagnosis has improved. We've got better at screening patients, picking up the cancer early, and all things being equal, the earlier you can detect the cancer, the more likely you are to result in a cure.
Welcome back to the Proactive Studio. It was estimated that in 2024, there would be around 169,500 cases of cancer diagnosed in Australia and around 52,700 deaths from cancer in the same year. So we have something a little different for you today as we chat with Race Oncology MD Daniel Tillett about cancer, chemotherapy, different treatments, and where race fits into the treatment space. Daniel, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too, Jonathan.
So before we get into, I guess, the nitty-gritty of chemotherapy and cancer treatments, can you give us a little bit about yourself and what attracted you to this space?
Yeah, my background is I'm a scientist by profession. I've worked in the biotech space, have a private biotech company in the genomic space. And I used to be a lecturer at La Trobe University in the School of Pharmacy. So have a bit of familiarity in this area. But really what attracted me to was I was very aware of clinical risk and the problem with, really new and exciting treatments that are sort of scientists get excited about and investors get excited about is the probability of them succeeding is very low. So as an investment, they're great science and, the future's there, but the probability of success is in oncology, for example, it's less than 3% of drugs make it from, phase one all the way through to approval. So there's lots of things that can go wrong. The newer the drug that you're trying to develop or the treatment you're trying to develop, the less likely that drug is to get to market. So, one of the advantages of looking at more traditional approaches and trying to improve those is that you take away a lot of that risk. From an investor perspective, you'd much rather invest in a company that's got, a clinical program that's got, say, 75, 80% chance of success than one that's got maybe 1% chance of success. So overall, it's much better to read the scientific papers and watch from afar rather than putting your own money into these high-risk companies.
And we'll get into Race's treatment shortly, bisantrene. But before we do that, let's frame all of this and talk about chemotherapy and where it's at and the most common short-term, long-term side effects and how they impact patients' quality of life.
Yeah, so there's sort of three traditional ways of treating cancer. You can either cut it out, surgery, still very effective. And in fact, many patients can be cured just purely through surgery, particularly if caught early. Second way was radiation. That was developed is still very widely used, very effective, a bit more quite traumatic, but still very effective. And the sort of third traditional way is what's known as chemotherapy, which is basically just using chemicals to treat the cancer. And that's been very effective. It's been developed pretty much over the last sort of 60, 70 years. And it remains the backbone after surgery and radiation for treating most patients. So all the new exciting treatments that are coming through, targeted agents, kinase inhibitors, immunotherapies, they at the moment only are helpful for a relatively small percentage of patients. Under 20% of patients can be helped because we just don't have drugs for most cancer types. And so you're relying on the traditional ways of treating patients. So the downside of that is, whilst they can be very effective, they are very damaging and can leave the patient with a lot of permanent long-term damage. And so there's a real need to improve those whilst we have to rely on them, make them better, less dangerous, and more effective for patients.
And I do want to get into that a bit further, but before we talk about that, healthcare professional, I mean, what you've just said there, it makes healthcare professionals' jobs a little bit more difficult in terms of not only do they have to treat with medications, etc., but they also have to treat the side effects and treat patients mentally as well. I mean, there's a lot that healthcare professionals have to do in this space to actually help cancer patients.
Yeah, it's not just a matter of just focusing entirely on the cancer. You can decide, okay, we're going to treat very aggressively and go after that cancer, but that can leave the patient permanently damaged and worse off than they were. So they can be sort of out of the frying pan and into the fire, as the sort of cliche goes. And that's very, very common. Radiation, surgery can both do these things. and chemotherapy in particular can also do this. These are really powerful, basically poisons. And the theory is that they're slightly more poisonous to the cancer than they are to the patient, but it's only slightly more, as many patients are permanently damaged by their treatment, and that's not a good outcome.
No, no. And it's also determined by individual factors as well. You've got age in there, overall health, cancer type.
Exactly. And it's just the individual itself. Some people just react really badly to a particular treatment, and you can't tell in advance when this happens. So some patients can be just left completely devastated by treatment, that another patient would bounce back after a few weeks.
Mm,
There's a huge amount of variation from patient to patient.
yeah, yeah. So how does all that? I mean, how does it influence the severity and duration of chemotherapy side effects?
Well, a lot of chemotherapy now is being limited by the side effects.
Mm,
So a really good example of this is what are known as anthracyclines. They're a class of drugs, very effective, been
mm,
around for over 50 years now. They work on a wide range of cancers, but one of the side effects, serious side effects they do is they damage your heart.
mm,
And so now oncologists, clinicians will actually limit the dose to the patient purely to prevent damage to the heart. So they'll end up affect what's called undertreating the cancer, because they have to balance the treatment of the cancer against the side effects that come with that treatment. And unfortunately, the heart has no ability to regenerate from any damage, and any damage you cause will be with you for the rest of your life. So, and that becomes really a problem. It's a problem when you're young, but it's a real problem as you get older and your heart has less capacity just because of natural aging and all the rest of it. So yeah, so this makes the job of a clinician really difficult, because you got to balance not only the cancer you're trying to treat, but also the side effect profile. So there's a real need for treatments that, have fewer side effects and are better at treating the cancer.
And this obviously brings bisantrene into the equation here. Before we touch on that, can you talk me through generally the advancements in cancer treatments that aim to reduce the severity of chemotherapy side effects?
Yeah, unfortunately there hasn't been a huge amount. There's been a little bit of what's known as supportive care drugs. So one of the common side effects of chemotherapy is what's called bone marrow suppression. So you get your white blood cells, your red blood cells stop dividing. They're very sensitive to the same drugs. And so you can often end up anemic or get infections. So there's been some, I guess, hormones that can help your bone marrow bounce back from damage. But beyond that, there's been things that make you feel a little less sick. But there's been really a lack of progress in this area over the last 20 years. And as a consequence of the whole industry has moved focusing on these targeted agents, which are targeted to specific mutations in a cancer, or immunotherapy or cell therapy. These are the new exciting things, but they're sort of the traditional things that are widely used have sort of been forgotten about and haven't had the attention they really deserve.
Mm. So, the survivor rate's improving at all?
Yes, overall, but slowly. It's chipping away. Combination of a lot of things. So better treatments. So some of these newer targeted agents are making a huge difference. Immunotherapy has made a huge difference. If you have the right type of cancer, if you've got, say, melanoma, or some lung cancers will respond really well. And you can go from being on death's door, with weeks to live, to being completely cured. But for the majority of patients, it's a slow progress, a little bit at a time, chipping away. It's, I guess, kind of a French warfare type situation where you advance a few feet at a time, but it's slowly being progressed. So cancer is an incredibly difficult disease to treat, because every single patient is cancer is unique. It's never been ever before. The mutations, the history of it, the background of the patient itself means that you never know how they're going to respond. So you take a drug that was, this is a very common thing that happens with cancer, that you take a cancer and you check to see which drugs might work well on it. And it might turn out you've got a lung cancer, and it might turn out that a melanoma drug works really well on it, or a leukemia drug works really well on it. And the doctors don't know that in advance. So it's difficult. The other one, I guess, is diagnosis has improved. We've got better at screening patients, picking up the cancer early, and all things being equal, the earlier you can detect the cancer, the more likely you are to result in a cure. And This has been a thing with bowel cancer, breast cancer. These are now starting to come in with lung cancer, where they're starting to screen everyone for that. These types of things, screening will really start to make an impact on survival. So we'll still have as many cancers, but we want to have, more people not dying of cancer.
So let's bring race into the conversation now. Can you talk me through what you guys are doing, what you're developing, what stage of development bisantrene is at, and what you hope to achieve in the long term?
Yeah. So, Race is an unusual company in that we took a old drug that had made it all the way through to market for leukemia called AML, but it had been dropped for basically for commercial reasons. And the reason why is couldn't be delivered very easily to patients. So, unfortunately, the drug is very insoluble in the blood. And as soon as you would inject it into the blood of a patient, it would immediately crystallize out and cause all sorts of side effect problems from that. So the original developers of this drug persevered away with it for a while, but eventually gave up and said, no, this is too difficult. So we've come back in and worked out how to fix that through what's known as formulation. So we have a new formulation that has the advantage of also solving the problems that could be delivered, but also meaning you've got new IP, so you have new patents around that. You've got like a 20-year patent on the new formulation. So that's sort of where we come from. The other thing we've done is we've taken this drug, was developed in the 1980s, where we didn't really know a lot about how cancer actually worked, and particularly how anti-cancer drugs worked. This drug was discovered what's known as empirically. Basically, they just synthesized chemical compounds until they found something that would kill the cancer cells. They didn't have any real idea of how it killed the cancer cells. So what we've done is we've gone back into the lab, use all the advances that have been made in science over the last 40 years to work out how it actually works. And that allowed us to identify a really interesting use for the drug, which is as a protection from other drugs for the damage they cause to the heart. So I mentioned before about anthracyclines and they're not being able to be used because of the damage to the heart. What we discovered is if we add bisantrene to anthracyclines, make it as a combination, we can protect the heart from the damage, and we also add to the cancer killing activity as well. So we get the best of both worlds, improved targeting of the cancer while protecting the heart from the side effects. So it's a really amazing discovery. And so that's what we're advancing now in a new clinical trial with a new formulation to explore exactly this in humans. So works really well in animals and cells, and we're about to find out whether this actually works in humans as well.
I'll get you to take me through those clinical trials in a second, but bisantrene itself, it has a history of clinical success, so there's something there to work with.
Oh yeah, we it's been improved. So it's been in more than 50 clinical trials. It's been very effective in a range of different cancers, more than 1,500 patients. So we know a lot about it. We know all the side effect profiles. We know the dose. We know everything about it. The new formulation's been designed to have the same properties inside the body, apart from the crystallization avoidance problem, as the old. So we were able to leverage all that old data and have a really good idea that this is going to work. So we take away all that clinical risk, 1% chance of success. We're at the other end of it where we already have a drug that's already made it through to the market.
Mhm.
So that from an investor perspective, that's something that's really important.
Mhm. And yeah, let's look at those clinical trials that you've been doing. Can you take me through, I guess, the progress that's been made through those clinical trials and where the clinical trials are at now?
Yeah, so we ran initially two phase two trials in Israel in acute myeloid leukemia in really heavily pretreated patients. And it's something that many investors don't realize is how quickly the success rate of a drug drops every time a patient fails what's known as a line of therapy. So typically a patient, the first time they get any treatment, they've got a reasonable chance of success. And then if they fail, that second one's even less chance of success and so on down the line. And by the time you get to fourth or fifth, the chance of success is almost zero. So what that means is with a new drug, you usually have to, or when you're testing a new drug, you usually have to test it in late stage patients. And so the probability of success is very low.
Mm.
And that's something to be aware of.
Mm.
It turned out that our drug, even in really heavily that had failed, patients that had failed up to 9 lines of therapy, we got a 40% what's known as complete response rate in those patients, which is quite impressive. enough so that if we were to run a phase 3 trial, that would be enough to actually, a success rate of that would be enough to get approval for that indication. We're not currently running any trials in AML. We're considering running uh, a investigator sponsored trial. The reason why is the market size for that is relatively small compared to the opportunity we have with cardioprotection anti-cancer, which is across all cancers. So it's like kind of 99% of the market is outside of AML. So we're focusing on the big rather than the small. And then we're about to start the phase 1 trial, almost any day now, very close to beginning that trial.
Yeah, so certainly a lot to look forward to. I just want to touch you've mentioned market opportunities throughout this discussion. I just want to touch on the market potential for bisantrene, but also the market potential for anthracyclines as well. Can you sort of talk us through
Yeah,
what those
yeah.
opportunities are?
Yeah, so anthracyclines are very interesting. They're a generic drug now, so they cost between sort of $60 to $100 a dose, so it's very, very cheap. And yet, even at that, they still sell 1.5 billion US dollars every year. So they're a very, very large market. Over 20 million doses are given a year. Very widely used class of drugs. And the reason why they're so widely used is they're so effective and they're used in so many different cancers. As a consequence of that, we're not trying to displace the anthracyclines. We're an add-on on top of that. So we don't have to convince any clinician to use our drug instead of anthracyclines, which they know and understand. We're saying to a clinician, use our drug with an anthracycline. What you'll get is you'll get protection from the side effects and you'll get a better cancer outcome. And that's a very compelling sort of commercial opportunity there. So you're already building on 20 million doses. A new drug coming through in cancer typically sells sort of somewhere between $20,000 to $50,000 a dose. You're looking at around $200,000 a patient. So you can start to add that up with it gets very, very large numbers. So we don't need very many doctors to take it up for it to be a commercial success.
So you've got a bit
So
of
we
a
think the
double whammy there.
opportunity is as big as they possibly get in the space.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a double whammy you've got there. It's
Yeah. Yeah, so it's we're adding on to a generic drug, which is being used. So we don't have to create the market. It's
yeah,
being there. It's causing lots of problems, and we're solving those problems.
yeah,
Great,
yeah.
a great place to be.
Yeah, and as you said earlier, I mean, heart issues are, aside along with cancer, the heart issues, cripple society, and they're a great. Sorry, we need to do something about,
Yeah, well,
heart
it's
disease as
incredibly
well.
like just if even if you just ignore the human suffering, which is
Yeah,
massive, because once
yeah,
your heart is damaged, you lose the ability to live a normal life.
mm,
So, patients go into treatment for their cancer and come out the other end cured of their cancer, but not able to get out of their chair
mm,
or not able to walk up their stairs or do anything that they enjoyed in life beforehand. And that's, they're barely better off than they were, with the cancer. So to avoid that is an enormous thing. The other one that happens is because patients with cancer very frequently, because they're old, they have a lot of what's known as comorbidities.
mm,
They have a lot of heart problems as well. And the consequence of that is doctors get reluctant to use the drugs because if they've already got pre-existing heart disease, they worry if they cause any extra damage, the patient's going to be very severely
mm,
damaged. So what they end up doing is not treating the patient or under treating the patient. And that's not a great outcome from the perspective of treating the cancer. So you get this way, we hope that if the trial runs like it has with the animal studies, that will end up with a drug that will allow doctors to use these anthracyclines to their full potential and get the most out of them without having to worry about the long-term permanent side effects that come with them.
mm. So what Race is doing really, I mean, it's really there are milestones here in both cancer treatment and heart treatment. So can you talk me through those milestones and what we can expect in the short to medium term now from the company?
Yeah. So we're running a phase 1 trial. But it's really more a phase 1/2 trial. The way it's designed, it's got a two-part. The
Mm,
first part is because bisantrene and doxorubicin have never been used together inside humans. Back in the days when bisantrene was being developed, all the cancer drugs were used on their own. They weren't used in combination. So we have to work out what the safe dose is of the two drugs together, and it's called a dose escalation. And then once we know that, we're then going to run a run-on, an extension, where we look to see what the effect of the combination of the drugs at the appropriate dose is on the effect on the heart. Is it protecting the heart? Is it treating the cancer better? And we'll get an answer in that out of the phase one. So this will be a proof of concept, and we will know whether it works or doesn't work. And all the other risks that normally come later on in development will be known up front very early. It's open label, which means it's not a double-blinded trial where we don't know the answer for a couple of years. We get results continuously throughout the trial so that investors can get updates of how things are progressing, what we're seeing in the trial, how patients are performing, all those sorts of things. We can give regular updates as we're going along, which is really important from an investor's perspective because investors are impatient. Many of them have the sort of the patience of a 5-year-old juiced up on red cordial at a party. And so they need constant, updates about what's going on. They don't want to sit around and wait 3 years to learn what the outcome of that is. And I'm sure you've spoken to many companies where they're sitting around waiting for the outcome of a phase 2 or phase 3 trial, and there's nothing to report other than the trial appears to be going well, but we have to wait until the end, and then you get a big excitement at the end, and hopefully it's a success. But not always it is. So there's always a lot of hope. So open labels, if you can do it, is a great way of running trials. You can't always do it, but when you can, it's great.
Yeah. And I guess that brings me to the next question. I mean, it is an important space for investors to be in. So what should they be looking for in a company in this space?
Yeah, I invest quite a bit myself. That's how I came to Race as an investor. I wasn't a founder of the company or anything like that. So I came in as an investor, and I was interested really in minimizing clinical risk. That was my major focus. So I wanted to make sure that the risks that I'm dealing with are ones that can be quantified. Clinical risk is just completely unknown. No one knows. You could ask the top experts in the world, and they'll say, yes, this will work, or they'll say, no, it won't. And unfortunately, nature is a very cruel mistress, and the best ideas in the world turn out to be false, and things that people thought couldn't be true turned out to be true. And so that's the risk you take on as an investor. That's just a complete unknown. Where other things like funding and management and all the rest of it, they're all IP. These are all kind of fixable, man-made things. You can get a handle on that. You can put a risk profile against that and have some sort of idea, does the reward outweigh the risk? And then you can make an investment. You can take on a lot of risk if the return is very large. If you think they succeed, the company succeeds, they're going to be 100 times their current market cap. You can afford to be wrong a lot of the time as an investor, as long as you don't put all your money into one company. If you're investing in 100-time return companies, so I don't mind risk as long as the reward's there. But I need to be able to quantify it, and I can't quantify clinical risk.
Yeah. So, I mean, based on this discussion today, just one final question. Based on what you guys are doing and others out there's a lot of optimism out there in this space. There's a lot going on and a lot to look forward to.
Yeah, there is a lot going on. What's happened is there's been a lot of advances in science. Science hasn't stood still. There's been all these billions and billions of dollars poured into science, discovering how cancer actually works and how a lot of diseases work. So in the past, doctors were really pretty blind they would just try some ground up herb or something like this and see whether it would work. And they were just basically guessing all the time. Nowadays, we actually can pull apart, right down to the DNA level, all the proteins, exactly the mechanism of action, what's responsible for causing something. And then when you have that information, it's much easier to design a drug or treatment that can actually target that specifically. And that gives a lot of optimism that you can actually do something about these seemingly intractable diseases like cancer. So that's why there's a lot of optimism by those who sort of understand the space. Same time, it's still an incredibly difficult problem. So it's moved from the impossible to the extremely hard, which is good. That's progress.
It is. There's a lot of progress being made, and you guys are doing a great job in that space. Daniel, thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Jonathan.